Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Jumpstart American Jobs Series. I'm Nancy McClernand, and I'm President and CEO of the Global Business Alliance. The Global Business Alliance is a trade association representing about 200 international companies doing business in the United States. We advocate for policies to ensure that the United States remains the most competitive location around the world for companies to invest, which in turn creates American jobs and spurs economic growth. We believe an important element in achieving that objective is to strengthen our global connections with our allies around the world. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be talking to executives at some top American companies and business associations. We want to find out how have they been managing through this crisis. We're going to dive into the challenges they have faced and the outlook for the future. This is a first for GBA, so bear with us. But we really thought that the extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in demanded this sort of whole of business look to determine the priorities needed to propel America's economic comeback. First, I'd like to thank Nestle for sponsoring the entire series, as well as all of our session sponsors. This morning, we're focused squarely on the health crisis itself as we talk with some of America's top pharmaceutical executives. We know that until the risk of COVID-19 is significantly diminished, economic recovery and job creation will not fully take hold. I'm really excited this morning to be joined by Bill Seibold, President of Sanofi North America, and Ru Dauber, EVP and President of the Biopharmaceuticals Business Unit of AstraZeneca. I'm really pleased to say that both Sanofi and AstraZeneca are GBA members. Good morning, gentlemen. Bill, let's begin with you. I've read about the unprecedented collaboration taking place in the pharmaceutical industry, not just in the United States, but on a global scale. Sanofi is one of the few companies working on diagnostic testing, vaccines, and treatments all at the same time. And I know that you were involved in several collaborations. Can you talk a little bit about what role they are playing in your path to success?
Yeah, glad to. Thanks, Nancy. And, I often say that this is the best industry in the world because we can transform and save lives. And I really believe that this is the moment to really demonstrate that to the world. But the only way it's going to happen is if we have the collaboration that you mentioned. It's actually really heartening to see how the industry has come together during this pandemic. And it is so critical because I think we need multiple shots on goal that are going to hopefully result in something positive. And that's going to have to come from both large companies, small companies, public and private sector as well to give us the best chance of being successful. So the way we've thought about it is we have a strong expertise in-house with our own discovery, development, and manufacturings of drugs, vaccines, and over-the-counter medicines. But we also realize the importance of seeking out new partners to enhance these capabilities. And we have 4 key partnerships with other companies at the moment, with GlaxoSmithKline and Translate Bio, and that's to share our vaccine technologies. And then with Regeneron on the testing of existing treatments. And then finally, Luminostics, which is helping with a diagnostic testing solution. So the technology and the scientific insight that we have out of these collaborations will not only help us in the pandemic, but we believe it will be used in future non-pandemic diseases as well. But probably the most critical collaboration that I would comment on is this whole public-private partnership that exists in the US between government and industry. And the collaboration with public sector partners, including and probably most specifically the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, has really allowed for resources, expertise, and risk sharing. And this is going to help accelerate the development of a medical countermeasure. So I also think that these partnerships are going to be important as we think about the path to recovery through our distribution and administration of vaccines and therapeutics. So they're critical. It's the only way we're going to get through this pandemic.
It's really encouraging, Bill, to hear about all that collaboration. I'm going to turn to Ruud now. So, Ruud, AstraZeneca is part of the cost sharing program at the Department of Health and Human Services, which is focused rapidly on developing treatments and vaccines. Your company is often mentioned as leading the pack in terms of the companies heading toward phase 3 of clinical trials. Can you talk a little bit about how HHS's cost sharing program has impacted AstraZeneca's efforts to develop a vaccine?
And thank you so much, Nancy, for asking this important question. First of all, I think we are excited as a company with the progress we are making regarding a potential vaccine against the COVID-19 virus. And clearly, HHS, as well as the BARDA organization, are helping us tremendously in order to speed up the program. And the support we are getting is in fact threefold. They are helping us to define the clinical development of the vaccine. And very soon we will start with a very large phase 3 clinical trial in the United States with more than 30,000 volunteers. The second piece clearly is that they are helping us in order to help us with the manufacturing of the vaccine by contracting and supporting us with the contracting of other companies. And finally, hopefully they will help us also with the distribution of the vaccine. So all in all, I think it's a very impressive effort of the US administration in order to bring an effective and safe vaccine to American citizens sooner than later.
And can you talk a little bit about timing?
Absolutely. It's an unprecedented time, and that also requires unprecedented leadership in order to speed up clinical development, manufacturing, and then distribution. Of course, I can only talk on behalf of AstraZeneca, and we are going to produce at risk before we know whether the vaccine is effective and safe. But we don't want to lose time. And sometimes people are asking us, are you cutting corners? And be aware that regulators in the world are looking over our shoulder in every step we are making, because we will not end up, and we cannot end up, in order to produce a vaccine which is perhaps effective but not safe. But equally, we need to be realistic. Normally, vaccine development will take place over 10 years, and we try to comprise that now in less than 1 year. So the efforts companies are making in order to produce and develop an effective vaccine are unprecedented, and it requires, once again, unprecedented leadership of regulators across the world as well.
That is really an interesting point. And I'm going to want to bring Bill back in now. Bill, I understand Sanofi has the capability to produce more than 2.5 million doses of vaccine every day. Can you give us a sense of how your company's experience in vaccine development and production and how you expect to meet the current challenge?
Yeah, thanks. You know, we have a long-standing heritage in discovery, development, and manufacturing based on the years of experience through Sanofi Pasteur, which is our vaccines business within Sanofi. And we're developing 2 vaccine candidates at the moment to combat COVID-19. One's based on existing manufacturing technology, and that's what we use for our seasonal influenza vaccines, or one of our seasonal influenza vaccines, which is important because we have experience and capacity to manufacture already in the millions of doses for that. The other vaccine candidate uses a new technology called messenger RNA, and it's with our partner Translate Bio. And they've already established some relatively large-scale manufacturing for this novel technology. So the key to really, I think, combating COVID-19 will be having the availability of a large number of doses. So we're utilizing the capacity that we have internally, but also with external partners to achieve the type of scale that we need. And that scale is really to service the world. And just to provide the perspective, we supply more than 1 billion doses of vaccine per year, which makes it possible to immunize about 500 million people around the world each year. So we're going to take that experience and leverage it to a COVID-19 vaccine. And that scale up piece is so critical. It's easy to have an innovative technology. It's hard to scale that to the needs of the world.
Bill, it's really great to hear that you all are already thinking about what happens after discovery. Ruud, I'm going to bring you back in here. So not far from our nation's capital, AstraZeneca has major operations in Gaithersburg, Maryland, employing about 3,000 US researchers and experts. In addition to all the work you are doing here in the United States, I know that you are also doing work across the pond, specifically with Oxford University. Can you give us a little bit more details on how this transatlantic cooperation is impacting your company's efforts?
Absolutely. We have a long-standing relationship with the group in Oxford. I think it's fair to say that it is one of the most well-known vaccine development groups. And we were very happy when they approached us a couple of months ago in order to help them with their efforts in order to bring an effective and safe vaccine into the world. But of course, they are academics and they are very keen, like all of us, in order to make sure that the vaccine will be distributed in an equal way across the globe. And this is clearly a phenomenal collaboration with this group in Oxford. But equally, everyone recognizes that you can't do this on your own. You need to have collaborations of governments like the US administration, by the way, across the world, in order to make this massive effort a success. And just to give you some numbers, we're now building up a capacity of 2.1 billion doses across the world, more than 400 million doses in the United States, 400 million doses across Europe, and more than 1 billion doses in the developing markets. So this is truly a cross-collaborative effort across the world.
Bill, I also know that Sanofi has 14,000 workers here in the United States, but the company also has its own global connections. Can you help us understand how you all have mobilized your worldwide network over the last few months?
Yeah, you know, this COVID-19, it knows no borders. And what we've really tried to do is access all of the information available to us, from our research to our manufacturing assets all around the world. We've looked at our current products that are some marketed products. We've looked into our pipeline, and we've looked at new discovery solutions such as vaccines. And this is where I think actually pharma is very well positioned, and I feel actually Sanofi is really in a strong position, because we do have these different capabilities that we can access from around the world, and from the experience that we've had in both therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccines. But again, we've leveraged that to the best of our ability, and we know that we can't do it on our own. And that's why it's been so important for us to continue to partner. And as I mentioned before, BARDA, you know, we've been partnering with BARDA for more than 15 years. So it's very familiar to us, and it's great to be able to work with an organization like that that has this type of event in mind. Now, in Europe, there is no one-stop shop for public-private partnership like with BARDA. And that, I would say, is something which is a disadvantage. BARDA is really kind of leading the world in this. And we would like to see other companies adopt a BARDA-like approach to that partnership, for partnership in moments like this. We also, just in thinking about our day-to-day business, you know, we've been doing all of this work for COVID-19 on top of our current business, which is making sure that we provide our current medicines to patients all over the world. And it's put a real strain on the system to make sure that we can continue to deliver product, to manufacture product. And I've been really impressed that our global network has been able to continue the manufacturing of all the products we've run nonstop through COVID-19 to make sure that we can deliver life-saving medicines to patients all around the world.
So now, Ruud, what has this experience demonstrated to you in terms of the US market itself? Specifically, by that, I'm meaning, what are your thoughts regarding America's biopharmaceutical leadership role coming out of this crisis?
I think, and I need to give a big compliment to once again, the US administration. I think the reward for innovation and making something happening is very substantial. I have the privilege to work with many other governments across the world, but the speed and the willingness to work together, I think that the partnership, the public-private partnership we are seeing in the US is, I think, a clear example for other governments around the world. And we are, yes, there's competition, the competition among companies. I think that's always healthy. But in this specific case, the competition is against the virus. The virus is not recognizing any borders. And the sooner we have an effective and safe vaccine, it will help, of course, humanity. There's a health crisis in the world, but also from an economic perspective. So I'm incredibly impressed about the collaboration so far and the willingness in order to work with us as a company.
And finally, I have one last question to both of you before I let you go. I want to talk about the distribution process of effective drugs once they are developed. In a Washington Post April op-ed, Bill Gates wrote, "Even before there's a safe, effective vaccine, governments need to work out how to distribute it." So we have many public officials tuning in today, and I'm wondering if you all have any guidance to offer them as they think about the distribution of vaccines and other treatments.
Yeah, this is a very sensitive subject, sensitive for companies. What are we going to do with the distribution? Who's going to get the vaccine first? In our case, we have a very clear contract with BARDA, so we will supply hundreds of millions of the doses if it is effective and safe to the BARDA organization. And whether it is the CDC or Operation Warp Speed, who is going to distribute, is still unknown. And our clear ask is to make that clear sooner than later, so that we know how to deal with that. Equally, I think for the public, it's very important that the administration is going to give clarity about the first doses. Who is going to get the first doses of the vaccine? Healthcare workers probably are the first group to go. Vulnerable people, immunocompromised people, people with a high age, and the sooner administrations around the world or the WHO is going to give clarity about that, I think the better it is, so that they can educate societies around the world about the vaccine and how it works, and also to calm down people if they have a fear in order to get a vaccine, because we have one objective, and that's to deliver an effective and safe vaccine, and societies, they need to be educated about that.
Well, thanks, Ruud. You make some really great points there, because we know that the discovery and manufacture of a vaccine alone is not what we have to focus on. We have to make sure that, first of all, it's safe and effective, but then we need a way for distributing it, as you say. And we're really fortunate in the US that I think we have a strong immunization process already with the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, and the CDC, who oversees the recommendations and guidelines for the use of immunizations by providers across the country. And I think this is a trusted and effective network, and we should use that for the COVID-19 vaccine. I think this gives a lot of confidence to anyone who's going to be taking the vaccine, and it's important that we leverage some of the resources that we have. However, I think we need to look at the immunization infrastructure that we currently have and think about how we can strengthen those capabilities as soon as possible, so that we can not only handle the normal vaccinations that are taking place currently, but to also handle the volume of the COVID-19 vaccination, which is going to be necessary as we try to immunize the entire population. So there's going to require investments in staffing, training, and infrastructure that need to be made now. And it will begin to help immediately, as I said, with the one-time delivery of routine immunizations, but also benefit COVID-19. And we really believe that the CDC is in the best position to oversee and coordinate the upgrade of I should say, of this system of public and private providers. And I think finally, confidence is going to be so driven for people by the safety of the product. And this is where we're going to be relying on the FDA. And I'm, happy with the recent FDA guidance that talked about the data that's needed to facilitate the manufacturing, clinical development, and approval of a COVID-19 vaccine. I think that's very important to set that expectation. It requires transparency on both sides. This is something that companies have to participate in, and I think regulators around the world should follow that lead.
Thank you both for all your time this morning, and thank you and your companies for all you're doing to help the whole world get to the other side of this crisis. After this short message, I'll be joined by Steve Ubel, President and CEO of Pharma. See you in 60 seconds. Welcome back, everyone. I'm really pleased now to be joined by Steve Ubel. He is President and CEO of Pharma, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. Good morning, Steve. As we speak, more than half of Pharma's membership are conducting research on potential treatments and vaccines, or they're providing critical medical supplies and financial donations to support patients and first responders. Just really impressive stuff. Steve, I saw you quoted as saying the pharmaceutical industry will need a lot of shots on goal to develop a viable COVID-19 vaccine. And Bill mentioned this earlier. What do you see as the path forward in the near term as vaccines and therapeutic treatments become available to the public? And is it really possible that we'll arrive at a point where multiple vaccines have been approved?
Thanks, Nancy. Maybe just a step back. I'm just really proud of the way the industry is rallying across multiple fronts in the fight against COVID-19 and really collaborating in unprecedented ways. And let me just focus on four key areas. The first is testing. Roche, one of our member companies, is running one of the largest platforms to enhance the nation's testing capacity. But what you might not be aware of is that our companies have their own laboratory expertise. So one of our member companies, Eli Lilly, opened its own drive-through testing center in Indianapolis to supplement state public health authorities there. The second area, of course, is our companies are scanning their vast global libraries to see if any of their medicines that are already approved by the FDA could be repurposed in the fight against COVID-19. And they fall into several categories. Antivirals, we've already seen Gilead's remdesivir approved as one of the first medicines to treat COVID-19. We're also studying immunologic agents. As we all know, the cytokine storm, or the inflammatory response that invades the lungs, is a key factor in the disease, and there are a number of agents that are being studied to address that. Anticoagulants, blood clotting in the organs is a big challenge. So anticoagulants are being studied. There are currently over 1,200 clinical trials governing about 200 products that are being studied. And those products are being made available to patients already in the context of these clinical trials. Our companies are also developing new therapies. One of the most promising areas of research is monoclonal antibodies. So we all know if a person is infected and recovers, their body produces antibodies to help fight the disease. And that's already being used in the context of convalescent plasma. But what our companies are doing now is identifying which are the most effective antibodies to neutralize the virus and growing them at scale in bioreactors. So in the next few months, it's highly likely we'll see a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies used both prophylactically to prevent disease, as well as to help patients fight the disease. And finally, of course, perhaps most importantly, is the search for a vaccine. There are now more than 200 vaccine programs underway. Some of those programs, about a dozen or so, are already in human clinical trials. As you pointed out, having lots of shots on goal is absolutely critical for a few reasons. One is not all of them are going to work. Patients respond to vaccines in different ways. And we're going to need multiple vaccines to meet demand. We may have a situation where we need billions of doses if it takes more than one dose over time for the world's population. So it's really important to have a variety of efforts, and I think the companies are making great progress. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to have a vaccine end of the year, beginning of next.
I know that the world is looking at the biopharmaceutical industry like never before. Can you talk a little bit about what that is like and how has the industry positioned itself to deal with such an enormous challenge? And are there any parallels from previous outbreaks that have helped prepare the industry?
Well, I am cautiously optimistic about the industry's ability to deliver in those four areas I mentioned for three key reasons. The first is the industry is tapping deep scientific expertise over decades studying similar viruses. So if you think about SARS or MERS, hepatitis C, HIV, Ebola, our companies are really leaning on that deep scientific experience. Gilead, for example, have spent years and $1 billion researching remdesivir for Ebola. And unfortunately, it didn't work in Ebola, so it sat on a shelf until it was studied for COVID-19. So tapping that deep scientific experience is allowing the industry to move quite quickly. The second factor, I think, is just investments the companies have made over time in new technologies. You may recall during the SARS epidemic about a decade ago, it took almost 2 years to get the first candidate vaccine into human trials. And here we are today with regard to COVID-19, where 2 to 3 months after the first case, we're already moving candidate vaccines into human trial. And that's because of technology investments that have allowed the companies to decode the virus and make adjustments on their platforms in record time. And then finally, I think the industry alone really has the capability to manufacture at scale and disseminate any safe and effective therapy or vaccine. So for those three reasons, I really believe the industry is well positioned to succeed.
Despite the laudable goals, one of the most concerning aspects of this pandemic in terms of policy making from GBA's perspective has been the calls for cutting off global pharmaceutical supply chains. Can you talk a bit about Pharma's perspective of such a policy and what, if any, long-term impact that could have on America's ability to respond to future pandemics?
Yeah, great question. We of course, support incentives and other policy reforms that would incentivize more investment in the United States, more manufacturing in the United States. But I would say at the outset that a robust, diverse supply chain is a feature, not a bug, of modern drug development. And it allows our companies to make adjustments to avoid disruption and shortages. And if there are targeted problems, we should solve them, of course. But we're quite concerned about any abrupt change in the supply chain that would constrain the supply chain during this pandemic and make it harder for our companies to do what we need to do in the near term. So again, I think we want to be constructive, work with policymakers. We obviously, for certain products, don't want to see an overdependence on any country. Having said that, we don't want to see abrupt constraints on the supply chain that could actually exacerbate the problems and cause more disruption, more shortages, increase in prices, et cetera.
So I'm going back to March now, Steve. During a public policy discussion, you emphasized the idea that the relationship between government and industry is a collaboration, and it's not a competition, despite the tendency for some to pit the two against one another. So I'm quoting you now. This type of seamless collaboration between government, industry, academia, and investors can really only happen in the United States. So I find that really interesting, Steve, and I want to know, is that still your view? And if so, can you elaborate?
It is my view. I would say a couple of things. First, the COVID experience, I think, is instructive. We now have a weekly interaction with the FDA, with our senior leaders, R&D leaders, regulatory officials, and key officials within the FDA and the NIH. And everyone is focused on how to move as concurrently as possible, as opposed to sequentially. And I've really been struck by the seamless coordination and collaboration, not only within our own member companies who are checking their competitive juices at the door. You heard from Ruud earlier that the race isn't against each other, it's against time and against the virus. So our companies are really collaborating in unprecedented ways. They're agreeing to common clinical trial protocols. They're sharing clinical trial results in real time. They're even donating excess manufacturing capacity if one of their competitors develops a safe and effective product that's approved by the FDA. And all of these issues are being discussed with regulators in real time. And I think that's a great microcosm of the larger point I was trying to make, which is, the U.S. has the most impressive innovation ecosystem in the world. It's the envy of the world. Why? Because we have vibrant capital markets. We have the world's best doctors and hospitals. We have a symbiotic ecosystem where small companies work very closely with large companies to bring products to market. We have a gold standard regulator. We have a framework in the Bayh-Dole Act that allows our companies to seamlessly coordinate with government and academia. And by the way, for academia and others to share in the fruits of any product that are commercialized. So we have this best in class innovation ecosystem, and at its core, it's about collaborating and complementing each other's strengths. Our critics often say, that the government develops these new medicines and we take the baton for the last mile of the marathon. Nothing could be further from the truth. The government focuses on early stage research, might provide clues for further work that our companies do, but they don't create medicines. And even recently, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins have made this point, that they're not aware of any significant medicine that's addressed the public health challenge that didn't involve a partnership with private industry. And I think that's bearing out today in the context of COVID-19.
So the pharmaceutical, this will be our last question, Steve. The pharmaceutical industry has been raising alarm about what it has seen as the stifling effects of regulation on scientific innovation and the research and development of new drugs. So against the backdrop now of the pandemic, I'd really welcome your thoughts on the ways in which policymakers can support the essential work coming out of your industry while pursuing their goal of affordability.
Yeah, it's a great question. Oftentimes, people try to pit one against the other, that we can't have innovation on the one hand and affordability on the other. And I think that's a false choice. FDA last year approved a record number of new medicines, 56 new medicines. And just a few highlights on that front. new medicines, the first cell and gene therapy to reverse blindness in kids who have a rare retinal disorder, a new medicine for spinal muscular atrophy, which again, devastating condition for kids, new precision medicines for cancer that are turning many cancers into manageable chronic conditions. And on the horizon, we have new medicines that will hopefully be curative, targeting wretched diseases like hemophilia and sickle cell disease. So against that backdrop, what we've seen in recent years is drug spending and prices are rapidly decelerating. They're both growing under the rate of inflation. The problem is that patients aren't really seeing the benefits of that. We have a situation where there's this dichotomy where drug spending and prices are going down, but their out-of-pocket costs are going up, due largely to misaligned incentives in the system. So oftentimes our companies provide rebates and discounts that can approach 50% of the list price of a medicine. Those are captured by health plans and often not passed on to patients at the point of sale at the pharmacy counter. So we have to address those misaligned incentives so that we can address affordability for patients at the pharmacy counter.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for your time today, and thank you to everyone tuning in. Now let's take a peek at what we'll be discussing next week.
Join us Monday, July 20th for Making It Here, Part 2 of the Jumpstart American Jobs series, focusing on what it will take to build America's manufacturing base stronger than ever. Hear from leading industry experts as they share their perspectives on workforce development, supply chains, and key policy priorities that will jumpstart job growth in America's manufacturing sector. Reserve your virtual seat by registering at jumpstartjobs.org, an initiative of Global Business Alliance.